just a couple other interesting anecdotes. I came out of the electric power business, and by the way, along the way, this company became much more interesting than my power company. So I quit and went to work at ICE, and moved to Atlanta, which I never thought I would do because I couldn't possibly. First of all, I offered Edwin and the entire team the ability to move to Los Angeles, and I just assumed everyone would move to Los Angeles, and I couldn't get one person. Aside from the fact they were all going to quit, I couldn't get one person to even think about moving to Los Angeles. I thought these guys were insane, but anyway, I've enjoyed being embraced by the community here. In year 2001, a bunch of our customers said, if you can do this with electricity and with natural gas, why are you dinking around with that? Those are US products. Why aren't you going for the big boy, which is oil, which is global? And so we bought using stock, which was amazing because we were a private company and had no market value. We bought, and we were a startup, but this was in 2001, and even though that was about the time that the dot-com bubble burst, there was still this hope we all had that dot-com, that Cisco and eBay and everything were going to continue to go to the moon, and Amazon. So we bought, using our own stock, the International Petroleum Exchange of London, which was a small oil exchange that was kind of a clubby thing where the oil companies would exchange oil barrels. And we shut that, and it had 50 guys that were there in this room that would deal in oil. We shut that down, moved it all onto the internet, and today we trade more than half of the world's crude oil, and we set the price of oil. So suffice to say, we've become highly visible to people in Washington, D.C. I testify there a couple times a year, which is why I'm comfortable standing in front of you. And in 2005, we decided to take the company public, and one of the interesting dilemmas that we had was that there were two exchanges in the U.S., equity exchanges in the U.S. There was the NYSE, that was the Grand Dame, and there was NASDAQ. And NYSE has the big trading floor that you see on CNBC every day with all the guys standing in it. And NASDAQ is completely electronic. And we decided to go with the old school, which really surprised a lot of people. And Bob Greifeld is the CEO of NASDAQ, and I'd never met Bob, and I got a call from him after we announced we were going public on the NYSE. And I've never heard somebody use the language on a telephone that he used with me. I'm telling you, he went ballistic. And he let me know that I was persona non grata. And I told him, if that's the way you introduce yourself, I think we made the right decision. And I hung up the phone on him. So anyway, the point there is that we were a technology company that was revolutionizing the way commodities were trading, taking it on the internet and shutting down those old floors. But when it came to make our own decision about where we wanted to have our own stock trade, we went back to the old thing. And it was interesting because it points out that, I mean, no question NASDAQ has better technology. But one of the things about technology is that isn't what sells people. It's the user experience. And the user experience in the NYSE is that. It is standing up there with a camera of CNBC on and pushing that thing, it's like a doorbell, that rings that bell for 15 seconds and starts trading. And that has been very difficult for NASDAQ to compete with. It still, today, draws the majority of large cap companies because of that visual. And it's an important lesson that we keep in mind that we have better technology than all of our peers. But you have to wrap that in a user experience. And frankly, NASDAQ's getting there. They now have that market site in Times Square if you ever walk by it, and you can go in there, and instead of ringing a bell, they have you sign a plexiglass board. But nonetheless, that is a very difficult thing to overcome. I'm going to see how many old guys there are in the room. After we had done all this, we got another wild idea. And And for those that know Billy Ray and Winthrop and have seen this movie, you know that they and Randolph and Mortimer Duke tried to corner the orange juice market. And we said, why don't we go buy that exchange? That's a real exchange. And so in year 2007, we bought the orange juice, coffee, cotton, cocoa exchange. We listed the contracts to trade electronically, listed them side by side with this open outcry trading floor. Within 10 months, there wasn't a single person on the floor. Technology had advanced so far in trading commodities in the 7 years that we had been doing this that couldn't even exist for 10 months. I want to talk a little about more recent events, just to give you a sense on why we've been in the news lately. In 2008, September 2008, Lehman collapsed, and really, I personally, and I've gotten to know a lot of these financial services guys, so I know a lot of these CEOs. And in fact, Jamie Dimon, who runs JP Morgan, is in town and is having lunch with a bunch of us today. And Hank Paulson stepped in and put the TARP money into the banks to stop what was really becoming a global run on the banks. And TARP went in, and basically it was the U.S.'s government's way of saying to traders and market participants around the world that we are standing behind the banks. We're not going to allow these things to collapse. And it stemmed the immediate crisis of this run on the bank. But we then ended up in this terrible situation where the banking industry basically froze, and everybody started to say we have to get the toxic assets off the books of the banks in order for the economy to have a chance of starting. And so the government created these programs after TARP that were kind of ridiculous. This thing called PPIP, and they created a thing called TALF, and it was all this crap, and it was government trying to figure out how to clean up a bank. And in government, and no offense if I don't exactly know who the audience is, but they're not necessarily the best at doing this. So I kept reading, and we kept reading, and ICE and talking about that. They got to get the toxic assets off the books of the banks. So we said, why don't we do it? And we have big egos, so we said, hey, we can fix it. So anyway, I hired a law firm, and we started to, and we didn't know anything about financial derivatives. And I hired a law firm and some other experts, and we started to learn inside our company about credit default swaps and what they were. And we heard in the news these were these terrible toxic things that had caused this crisis. And we had to get them off the books of the banks. So this lawyer says, you got to go talk to this guy named Timothy Geithner. And I had never heard of Timothy Geithner, and I swear you had never heard of Timothy Geithner. And he was the head of the New York Fed. And I have heard of the New York Fed, but in reality, I actually don't know what the New York Fed does. And I didn't then, that's for sure. And so he said, you got to go talk to this guy. And I said, why do I talk to him? He said, at the end of the day, he regulates Wall Street. And if you're going to have any prayer of getting anything done, this guy's got to endorse you. So I go meet Tim. He was great. The lawyer set up a meeting. He was gracious enough to meet with us. And I said, told him our story, a little faster than I told it to you. And I said, we set up this clearinghouse that we use to clear energy business. And why don't we put these toxic assets in this clearinghouse? And I'll mark them to market every day, and I'll demand collateral from the banks. And we'll clean this up. And he liked the idea. He said, that's a great idea. And he said, but I can't help you. He said, I'm a government official, and I can't pick winners and losers in how to do this. He said, but then he said to me, but I'll tell you something. If you guys go build a barn and you open up the doors, I'm going to run those horses right by you. And so we said, got it. So we, in 2008, 2009, built a credit default swap clearinghouse and started to take the toxic assets off the books of the banks. And so today we have taken, I think, about $23 trillion worth of assets out of banks and put them into our clearinghouse. And to put that in context, there's about $35 trillion worth of credit default swaps. So we've done, or maybe even 30 now, we've done 23 out of 30, 35. So the vast majority of the credit default swaps now exist in a Oracle database that's not too far from here.